You ever have that one dream project you keep putting off for years? That one thing you promise yourself, one day, I'll finally do it. Yeah, that was me in my renovation. See, I'd been staring at my backyard for years, thinking, man, this space could be amazing if I just had the time, the money, and the energy. It started as a simple idea, maybe add a little patio, a few plants, and a fire pit for weekend hangouts. But, you know how dreams go. They start small and then somehow turn into blueprints, contractors, and multiple trips to Home Depot. So, after saving up for what felt like forever, I finally decided it was time. No more excuses, no more waiting for the right moment. This was my house, my property, my little corner of peace. I wanted to make it mine. The plan? A full backyard renovation. We're talking about tearing up the old cracked concrete, putting in new stone pavers, adding a cozy wooden deck with built-in seating, maybe even a pergola with hanging lights. The kind of setup that makes you go, yeah, this is where I'm spending every weekend for the rest of my life. I wanted a space that felt warm, relaxed, like a vacation without leaving home. It wasn't about showing off or boosting property value. This was personal. See, that renovation wasn't just about aesthetics. It meant something deeper. For me, it was a fresh start, a reward after years of hard work and long nights. I'd gone through some rough patches, job stress, family stuff, the usual grown-up chaos. This project was like therapy. I wanted to build something beautiful out of all the mess. So when the first day of construction came, I was hyped. The smell of fresh wood, the sound of saws buzzing, and the sight of the first boards going up, it felt like progress. You could practically feel the energy shift around the house. I had my coffee in hand, music playing, and my contractor, great guy named Mike, walking me through the day's plan. He said, "We'll have this part done in a week, tops." And I believed him. Everything was on schedule, everyone was smiling, and for once in my life, things were going smoothly. Now, here's the thing about living in a homeowners association, the infamous HOA. If you've ever dealt with one, you already know where this is heading. At first, I wasn't even thinking about them. I mean, why would I? I'd gotten the proper permits from the city. My paperwork was solid. The contractors were licensed. We weren't doing anything shady or illegal. Just improving my own property, right? But apparently, in HOA land, nothing goes unnoticed. I remember the first sign of trouble, this older guy from down the street walking his tiny dog, slowing down right in front of my property. He stood there for a bit, squinting at the construction, sipping his coffee like some undercover inspector. I gave him a friendly nod, he didn't nod back. That's when I should have known something was up. A few hours later, one of the workers told me, "Hey, some lady was out front taking pictures of the yard." And I thought, oh cool, maybe she likes the design. Spoiler alert, she did not like the design. By day 2, the HOA emails started rolling in. First one, we noticed unauthorized construction activity on your property. I blinked at the screen, completely confused. Unauthorized? Then another one followed, full of fancy legal phrases and threats about potential fines and covenant violations. Now, I'm a calm person, mostly. But nothing kills renovation joy faster than someone implying you're breaking rules for simply improving your home. I double-checked everything. City permit? Approved. Contractor license? Verified. Work schedule? Legit. Everything was by the book. So I replied to the HOA email, politely explaining that everything was permitted, and I'd be happy to show documentation if needed. I figured that would clear things up. Yeah. That was cute of me to think. The next morning, Mike shows up with bad news. "Hey, we gotta stop for now. Someone from the HOA came by and told us they're filing a formal complaint. Said we can't continue until it's reviewed." I laughed, thinking it was a misunderstanding. But when I stepped outside, there it was, a bright orange notice taped to my fence. Stop work order, HOA compliance review required. My heart sank. My beautiful project, halfway done, now looked like a construction zone frozen in time. Lumber stacked in the yard, tools scattered, concrete half poured. I called, emailed, and even walked to the HOA office, but no one wanted to give a straight answer. They said words like pending review, architectural committee, and violation of community standards. At that point, my frustration level was hitting the roof. I'd done everything right, and yet somehow, I was being treated like I'd built a nightclub in my backyard. That's when I realized this wasn't just about renovation. It was about control. And let me tell you, I wasn't about to let a few power-hungry board members decide what I could or couldn't do on my own land. But little did I know, things were about to get way worse. Because the next week after I thought it couldn't possibly get any crazier, the HOA called the police. We had no idea the HOA was about to call the police on us. So the next morning, I'm standing in my half-finished backyard, coffee in hand, feeling proud despite the mess. The sound of hammering, sawdust in the air, sunshine, it was all starting to come together. Then I saw it. A white envelope taped to my front door. Bold letters at the top. Notice of violation. At first, I thought it was some junk mail or maybe a delivery note. But the HOA logo in the corner told me everything I needed to know. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I tore it off the door, opened it right there on the porch, and started reading. Apparently, my unapproved renovation activity was in violation of the community architectural guidelines. It also mentioned something about failure to obtain prior approval from the association's architectural committee. Translation: they didn't like my deck. I remember just standing there for a second, blinking at the letter like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. Because, as far as I knew, I'd done everything by the book. City permit? Check. Licensed contractor? Check. Respect for my neighbors? Double check. But apparently, in HOA world, logic doesn't matter. You could have NASA engineers design your deck, and they'd still find a reason to say it violates community aesthetics. I walked back inside, waving the letter in the air like some kind of battle flag. Babe, I called out, you're not gonna believe this. My partner came out, still half asleep, and read over my shoulder. She squinted at the paper, then looked at me. Didn't you get all the approvals? I did, I said, pointing to my folder full of neatly stacked papers. Everything's legit. They just don't like that it's me doing it. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. That's when it hit me, this wasn't about rules. This was about power. See, I'd heard stories from other neighbors. You know, the usual HOA gossip. How Mrs. Callahan got fined for planting non-compliant roses. How the guy on the corner had to repaint his fence because it was the wrong shade of white. Apparently there's such a thing as unapproved white. I thought those stories were exaggerated. Cute little neighborhood legends. Nope. They were real. And now, I was starring in my own episode. Later that day, I got another email from the HOA board, this one even longer. They said my construction activities were creating visual inconsistency with the community's design harmony. I laughed out loud. Design harmony? What am I building, a temple? It's a deck. A deck that matches the rest of the house. Still, trying to be reasonable, I replied to the email. I wrote, "Hi, I've got full city permits, and I wasn't aware additional HOA approval was required. Please let me know what forms or info you need." Polite, right? Big mistake. Because that email triggered the flood. Within 24 hours, I got 3 more messages, one from the Architectural Review Committee, one from Community Compliance, and one from a board member I'd never even met. All saying the same thing: my project was not authorized and had to be halted until further notice. Meanwhile, I started noticing the neighbors acting weird. The same ones who used to wave every morning now just stared. You know that look? The we're pretending not to look but we're definitely watching look. I'd catch them peeking from their porches, whispering as they walked by. One lady even slowed her car to take pictures of the backyard while pretending to check her phone. I swear, if there was an Olympic event for nosy neighbors, my street would have taken gold. I tried to stay calm, but it was getting ridiculous. My contractor, Mike, called me later that afternoon and said, "Hey, someone from the HOA stopped by while we were working. They said we're in violation and started asking questions about permits." That's when the annoyance turned into disbelief. I said, "Mike, you've got the permits, right?" "Yep," he said, and I showed them, but they didn't care. They said this is an HOA issue. So now I'm standing there, wondering how something as simple as a backyard deck turned into a full-blown investigation. The next day, I found another envelope, this time slipped under my door. It was shorter, but the message was clear. You are hereby instructed to cease all construction activity immediately until the HOA board reviews your case. No warning. No hearing. Just stop. It felt unreal. I wasn't building a casino. I wasn't breaking noise laws. I was literally just improving my property. And yet here I was being treated like I'd committed some kind of architectural crime. I called the HOA office. Nobody answered. I emailed them again. Auto reply. Finally, I went down there in person. The lady at the front desk smiled politely, said the board wasn't available, and handed me yet another form to fill out if I wanted to appeal the decision. Appeal? Appeal what? It's my house. By that point, the frustration was starting to boil. I could feel it in my chest, that mix of anger and disbelief that only bureaucracy can cause. And that's when I realized something big. The HOA didn't just want me to pause. They wanted me to give up. They were hoping the paperwork, the delays, and the intimidation would make me stop altogether. But that wasn't happening. Still, as I stood in my yard that evening, surrounded by half-built lumber and silent tools, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. Because just as I was trying to figure out my next move, another notice showed up. This one was bold, stamped in red, and impossible to miss. Stop construction, effective immediately. And that's when they ordered me to stop construction immediately. You know that feeling when everything's going smooth, and then out of nowhere, boom, life throws a wrench into the gears? Yeah. That was me the morning the HOA sent in their little army. It started around 9 a.m. My contractor, Mike, and his crew were already out back, getting ready to pour concrete for the deck foundation. The sun was shining, the coffee was hot, and for about 10 minutes, life was perfect. Then a white SUV pulled up in front of my house. No logo, but I could already tell that's an HOA car. You can spot them a mile away. The kind that creeps along at 5 miles an hour, windows rolled down, clipboard ready for action. Out steps this guy in khakis and a collared shirt, sunglasses on, with the kind of confidence you only get from holding a clipboard. He walked up the driveway like he owned the place. "Morning," I said, trying to keep it friendly. He didn't smile. "Are you the homeowner?" Oh great, I thought. Here we go. "I am," I said. "What's up?" He handed me a paper, thick, official, covered in legal phrases in capital letters. Right at the top, in bold red font, it said, "Stop work order." I stared at it for a few seconds, half expecting Ashton Kutcher to jump out and tell me I was being pranked. "What exactly is this?" I asked, though I already knew. He cleared his throat, doing his best impression of a police officer. "The association has determined your construction project violates community guidelines. You are required to cease all work immediately until further review." I looked past him at the workers unloading materials. "You're telling me I can't even finish what's already started?" "That's correct," he said, with this tiny smirk that made me want to scream. "Any continued construction will result in daily fines." Daily fines. For fixing up my own backyard. Mike, my contractor, came over, wiping his hands. "Hey man, we got a schedule to keep. What's going on?" Clipboard guy turned to him like he was a bouncer at some exclusive club. "All work must stop immediately. You're not authorized to continue under HOA regulations." Mike gave me a look, that classic "I don't get paid enough for this" look, then said, "Sorry, bud. We can't risk getting fined or reported. Call me when this gets sorted out." And just like that, the crew packed up. The sound of tools and saws went quiet. The backyard fell completely silent, except for the wind and my blood pressure rising. It was honestly humiliating. There I was, standing in the middle of my half-finished dream, lumber stacked in messy piles, concrete forms half-poured, wires sticking out like some post-apocalyptic art piece, while my nosy neighbors watched from their porches like they were front row at a drama show. One guy even walked by with his dog, smiled, and said, "Looks like someone's in trouble." If looks could kill, that man would have been mulch. The HOA rep stayed long enough to make sure we stopped everything, then said, "You'll receive further notice once the board has reviewed your violation." I asked, "How long does that take?" He shrugged. "Could be a week. Could be a month." Then he added, with a little too much satisfaction in his voice, "You'll resume when we say you can." That line right there, that smug little sentence, hit a nerve. I wasn't mad about the rules. I get it, communities need structure. But this wasn't structure. This was control. They weren't protecting the neighborhood, they were flexing power. And the worst part? I couldn't do a thing about it right then. My project was frozen, my contractors were gone, and I was bleeding money every day it stayed that way. I spent the afternoon just staring at the mess, trying to wrap my head around how ridiculous it all was. My dream renovation now looked like a construction graveyard. Half a deck, piles of gravel, a trench where the walkway was supposed to be. It was embarrassing. Neighbors slowed their cars when they passed, probably wondering what kind of disaster I'd caused. That night, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by all my paperwork, permits, designs, receipts, just flipping through everything like maybe I'd find a magical loophole. I had every approval I needed from the city, but none of that mattered to the HOA. Because in their little rulebook world, they were the final say. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. All I wanted was to make my home better, safer, nicer, something I could be proud of. Instead, I was being treated like I'd built a UFO landing pad in the backyard. But here's the thing about me, I don't give up that easy. You can slow me down, sure, but you're not gonna stop me from finishing what I started. If they wanted a battle over paperwork, rules, and pride, fine. I could play that game too. Because I wasn't just fighting for a deck anymore. I was fighting for my right to make my home mine. So while they thought I'd roll over and wait for their precious review, I was already planning my next move. They thought they had control. They thought they'd shut me down. But what they didn't know was just how stubborn I can be. After the stop work order, my backyard looked like a scene from one of those Renovation gone wrong shows, except this wasn't TV. This was real life. And every time I looked out the window, I felt that mix of anger and helplessness bubble up again. But after a couple of days of sulking, I realized something: sitting around complaining wasn't gonna fix anything. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, fine, I'd play smarter. So I did what any stubborn homeowner with too much coffee and too little patience would do. I started digging through paperwork. Now, I don't know if you've ever read HOA documents before, but let me tell you, they're a special kind of torture. Long paragraphs, vague rules, and sentences that sound like they were written by a robot lawyer in the 1970s. Still, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee, a highlighter, and my laptop. It was time for me to decode the enemy's playbook. At first, I didn't even know where to start. There was the CC&RS, which I learned stands for Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, basically the HOA Bible. Then there were the bylaws, the architectural review guidelines, and a lovely section labeled Community Compliance and Enforcement. Fun reading material, right? I started highlighting every line that mentioned construction, exterior modification, and property improvement. My table looked like a rainbow exploded on it. There was one line that said, all exterior modifications must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Committee. Okay, fair. But right below that, there was another line, one they clearly didn't expect anyone to notice, that said, projects permitted by local government may not be delayed without just cause. Wait a second. I leaned in closer. Without just cause? What exactly counts as just cause? So, I pulled up my city's zoning and building code website. After a few hours and several cups of coffee, I found a clause that said once a city issues a construction permit, no private entity, including an HOA, can interfere unless the project violates public safety laws. Not community aesthetics. Not design harmony. Public safety laws. Which meant the HOA had no legal right to shut down my renovation. Cue the dramatic movie music. I actually laughed out loud when I realized it. These people messed with the wrong nerd, I said to myself. But it wasn't easy getting there. Those few nights of research were brutal. I was up past midnight, surrounded by stacks of papers, half-eaten snacks, and sticky notes everywhere. My partner would peek in and ask, "Are you coming to bed?" And I'd say, "Not yet, I think I'm close to proving I'm right." Honestly, I looked like a conspiracy theorist by the end of it. Diagrams, printouts, red circles around phrases like permitted construction and cannot interfere. If someone had walked in, they'd think I was solving a murder case. But the deeper I went, the more confident I got. The HOA had overstepped. Big time. They were acting like they had the final say, but the law said otherwise. It wasn't even a close call, the city permit literally outranked their architectural review. And that's when everything clicked. They weren't stopping me because I broke the rules. They were stopping me because they didn't think I'd fight back. That realization flipped a switch in me. All that frustration I'd been carrying turned into focus. They thought I'd just roll over and wait for their approval like everyone else, but nope, I was about to give them a crash course in reading the fine print. The next morning, I printed out everything, the city code, the permit, and the specific section of the HOA bylaws they conveniently ignored. I highlighted the exact sentences and stuck sticky notes on every page like I was prepping for a courtroom drama. Then, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, I called the city's building department. The clerk looked up my permit, confirmed everything was in good standing, and said, "As long as your contractor follows city safety codes, the HOA can't legally stop you." I swear, I almost fist-pumped right there in the kitchen. That's all I needed, confirmation. I finally had proof. Real, black and white evidence that the HOA had crossed the line. They'd been acting like the neighborhood sheriffs, but they were actually just bluffing. And that gave me a new kind of confidence. I wasn't just some annoyed homeowner anymore, I was armed with facts, paper trails, and legal backing. If they wanted a fight, they were gonna get one. Not with anger. Not with yelling. With cold, hard evidence. I leaned back in my chair, surrounded by piles of paperwork and empty coffee cups, feeling like I'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code of HOA nonsense. And I said to myself, with a grin, if they wanted a fight, I'd fight with facts. By the time the HOA finally invited me to a meeting, I was ready for battle. I had my binder full of paperwork, my highlighted printouts, and that steady calm you get when you know you're right. The email said, "Your case will be reviewed by the HOA board at our next community meeting." Translation, prepare to be publicly humiliated in front of your neighbors. So that Tuesday evening, I walked into the clubhouse, or as I like to call it, the neighborhood courtroom, with my documents tucked under my arm like legal weapons. The room was already half full. A few board members sat behind a long folding table, sipping from matching mugs like they were judges on some reality show. A few neighbors had shown up too, clearly there for the drama. You could almost hear the popcorn popping. At the center of it all sat her, the HOA president. Let's call her Linda. Linda was the kind of person who took neighborhood watch a little too seriously. She wore her authority like a crown and looked at everyone else like we were her loyal subjects. She smiled that fake smile, the kind that says, "I'm pretending to be polite but I'm secretly enjoying this." "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Your last name," she said. "We wanted to discuss your ongoing construction issue." "Sure," I said, taking a seat. "Let's discuss it." Linda folded her hands. "You began a backyard renovation without obtaining prior approval from the architectural committee, which is a clear violation of our covenants." I opened my folder slowly, cinematic style, and said, "Actually, about that." Then I pulled out the city permit, slid it across the table, and said, "Here's my permit, approved by the city building department. Everything's legal and inspected." You guys can't override that. Her smile twitched just a little. Well, the HOA still has the right to maintain community standards, she replied. I nodded. Sure, aesthetics, right? But I also read your bylaws. You can't delay a project that already has city authorization unless it's a safety issue. That got their attention. A couple of the board members leaned forward, squinting at the paper. Linda cleared her throat. Be that as it may, you did not follow the correct process. Ah, the classic HOA defense, you didn't follow the process. I couldn't help but chuckle. Linda, with all due respect, your process doesn't override city law. And nowhere in your rules does it say I can't start a permitted project. You could feel the room shift. Some of the neighbors started whispering. One guy in the back even nodded like he'd been waiting for someone to say it. But Linda wasn't giving up. She picked up her papers, trying to sound authoritative. This isn't just about legality. It's about maintaining the harmony of the neighborhood. We have design guidelines for a reason. Right, I said, leaning forward, and those guidelines are supposed to guide, not control. You're supposed to protect property values, not stop people from improving their homes. Boom. That line hit. Even one of the other board members gave a little side-eye like, he's got a point. Linda frowned. You can't just build whatever you want because you think it looks good. I smiled. I didn't build whatever I want. I built something approved, inspected, and perfectly legal. You just didn't like that you weren't the one who approved it first. You could hear a pin drop. That's when she dropped her favorite threat: if you continue without our authorization, we'll start issuing daily fines. I calmly pulled out another document, the city code I'd printed out during my late-night research, and said, you might want to check this section right here. HOA fines can't be enforced for permitted projects unless there's a proven safety violation. Want me to read it out loud? That did it. A few heads on the board turned toward her. One guy, probably the treasurer, mumbled, he's not wrong, Linda. Her face turned red. We'll need to review that, she said, clearly flustered. I sat back, trying not to grin too wide. Take your time, I said. But in the meantime, I'm just following the law. The meeting wrapped up shortly after that. They tried to play it off as, we'll get back to you soon, but I could tell I'd rattled them. The power dynamic had flipped, and they hated it. As I stood up to leave, a couple of neighbors gave me small nods, quiet little signs of support. One older guy whispered, good for you. Walking out of that clubhouse, I felt a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. For weeks, they'd treated me like some rule-breaking troublemaker. But now they knew I wasn't just another homeowner they could push around. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew Linda wasn't the type to admit defeat. If anything, this meeting had just made her more determined to make my life miserable. But that was fine by me. Because I already had a plan, one that would follow every rule, every line of the bylaw, just not in the way they expected. They wanted compliance? Oh, I'd give them compliance. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. Just not how they expected. After that showdown meeting, I walked out feeling like I'd just won the first round of a very long fight. I had facts, I had confidence, and I had a binder that could double as a legal weapon. But then, everything went quiet. And not the peaceful kind of quiet, the strategic kind. At first, I thought maybe the board just needed time to review my case. You know, the bureaucratic version of a timeout. But a week went by, then two, and I heard absolutely nothing. No emails. No letters. No calls. When I finally reached out, I got an automated response that said, thank you for your message. The board is currently reviewing your situation. That same line haunted my inbox for weeks. Every time I followed up, it was the same copy-pasted reply. It was like talking to a brick wall with a Gmail account. Meanwhile, my backyard, my once beautiful, half-finished dream, was starting to look like a construction graveyard. Piles of wood sat stacked and weathered, tarps half blown off by the wind. The unfinished deck had turned into a puddle zone after a few rainstorms. And then, just to make things worse, my contractor called. "Hey man," Mike said, "I hate to do this, but we gotta step away from the project for now. Too much uncertainty with the HOA. My crew can't afford to keep coming back and stopping." I understood it, but it still hit hard. That was the moment it really sank in. The HOA wasn't just delaying paperwork. They were freezing me out. No confrontation. No communication. Just silence. And that silence was louder than anything. It's honestly impressive how effective it was at first. You start second-guessing everything. Maybe I should have waited. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should just give up and call it a loss. But every time I walked outside and saw that half-finished deck, those thoughts disappeared. Because that wasn't just wood and nails, that was progress. That was me. Still, it wasn't easy. The stress started seeping into everything. My mornings turned into email refresh marathons. My evenings were spent pacing around, ranting to my partner about how ridiculous it all was. One night, she finally said, "Babe, maybe you should just let it go. It's not worth the stress." And I got it, she wasn't wrong. But at that point, it wasn't even about the renovation anymore. It was about principle. They can't just bully people into giving up, I said. If they get away with this, they'll keep doing it to everyone. She sighed. Yeah, but at what cost? That question stuck with me. Because she had a point, it was costing me time, money, sleep, and peace of mind. Neighbors started asking awkward questions, too. "So, what's going on with your backyard project?" I just smile and say, "Oh, HOA stuff," like it was some kind of bad inside joke. But deep down, I felt embarrassed. I hated how it looked, how it felt. Half of me wanted to scream, and the other half wanted to just start hammering things myself and see what happened. Then came the rain. That one storm, oh man, it destroyed what little hope I had of things staying manageable. The tarp flew off, water pooled everywhere, and some of the wood started to warp. I remember standing out there in the rain, just staring at it all, thinking, this is exactly what they wanted. Because that's the thing, the HOA didn't have to fight me directly. They just had to wait me out. No fines. No meetings. Just silence. They knew silence can break a person faster than confrontation. It drains you slowly, makes you question if any of it's even worth it. But what they didn't understand is, I don't break that easy. The longer they ignored me, the more determined I got. Every ignored email was fuel. Every delay was proof that I was right. So I changed my strategy. If they weren't going to talk to me directly, I'd make sure my voice was impossible to ignore. I started documenting everything. Every delay, every unanswered message, every bit of damage caused by their forced pause. I took photos, logged dates, even printed screenshots of my emails. If they thought their silence would bury the issue, I was about to dig it right back up and louder than ever. By the third month, I wasn't just fighting for a deck anymore. I was fighting for my right to be heard, for every homeowner who'd ever been stonewalled, delayed, or gaslit by a power-hungry HOA board. And maybe it sounds dramatic, but that silence lit a fire in me. Because they thought they could ignore me into submission. They thought I'd quietly walk away and chalk it up as a loss. But they underestimated one thing. I don't fade into the background. I don't back off. They thought silence would break me. It only made me louder. There's a weird kind of adrenaline that comes when you go from simmering frustration to actual, practical strategy. I traded the ranting forum energy for something more useful, a plan. Not the call the HOA and hope plan, an actual, step-by-step plan that involved other people who actually know how law and permits work. First up, a lawyer. I'm not proud of calling one, and my wallet felt lighter just hearing the receptionist, but I needed someone who could translate HOA speak into real-world consequences. The lawyer I found was blunt and pleasantly boring. Show me your permit, show me the communication, and don't do anything reckless. That last part was probably more for my ego than legal necessity, but the rest was exact and cold and useful. She pointed out things I'd been half suspecting. HOAs can control a lot of day-to-day neighborhood stuff, but they don't get to overrule municipal permits. If the city signed off, the HOA's ability to stop work narrows drastically, especially if the project complies with safety and zoning laws. That was the crack in the stone I'd been trying to pry open. Next, I walked into the city planning department like a tourist who'd stumbled into the VIP lounge. The clerk looked at my permit, typed a bit, and said, "Yep. Everything's in order on our end. If your contractor follows the approved plans and safety codes, the HOA can't legally stop you." It was almost relieving to hear it from them instead of just reading it at midnight. Official confirmation has a way of making things feel concrete. Then I called a building inspector. I wanted someone impartial, someone who could tell me, on paper, whether there were any code violations. The inspector came out, clipboard in hand, and spent 40 minutes poking around the site. He measured a few things, checked the foundation, and asked casual but pointed questions. At the end he said, "Looks like you're following code. I'll file a note to that effect." That note would be tiny, bureaucratic, and golden. While these professionals were doing their jobs, I did mine. I became obsessive about documentation. Every email. Every voicemail. Every envelope. I scanned notices, took photos of the stop work order taped to my fence, and logged dates and times of every interaction with the HOA. I printed out the permit, the inspector's preliminary note, and every relevant clause of the city code. I organized the paperwork into a neat folder with tabs titled Permits, Communication, Inspection, and my favorite HOA notices. There's something grounding about turning emotion into evidence. When I was furious, the paper made me calm. When I was embarrassed, the documentation made me sharp. Instead of shouting, I could reference a page number. Instead of stewing, I could present a timeline. I also started keeping a daily journal, not the poetic kind, the timestamp kind. April 3, 9:12 a.m. left voicemail at HOA office regarding review status. Little entries, boring on their face, but powerful in aggregate. If this ever became a legal fight or a public showdown, a clean chronology would be worth more than a dozen angry social media posts. And I broadened the circle. I talked to neighbors, not to rally a mob, but to collect witnesses. A few people admitted they'd seen the HOA rep take pictures. One neighbor said they'd been told rumors about community complaints from a person who lived 2 streets over. I wrote all of that down. Names, times, short statements. Nothing dramatic, just facts. This phase felt different. There was no yelling, no melodrama. It was methodical and almost zen in its efficiency. The rage that had been fueling me turned into a steady, calm focus. I had experts on my side, official paperwork, and a timeline that showed the HOA's actions and inaction in clear terms. Most importantly, I wasn't alone anymore. The lawyer explained possible next steps, a formal demand letter, administrative complaints, or even a motion to compel if the HOA continued to obstruct. The city inspector's note meant I could ask for enforcement if the HOA crossed the line. The planner's confirmation meant the law backed me up, not just my stubbornness. There's a strange confidence that comes from having a plan you can actually execute. It removes the noise. While the HOA hoped I'd wilt under confusion and delays, I was collecting the exact tools I needed to make my case unignorable. I still felt protective about the deck, about the time, the money, the days that had already disappeared, but the fear that had been creeping in was gone. Where there had been overwhelm, there was preparation. Where there had been humiliation, there was evidence. Where there had been doubt, there was clarity. When I looked at the folder on my kitchen table that night, everything felt different. Spreadsheets, stamped notes, an inspector's scribble, emails printed in order, tangible things that represented leverage. For the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I was acting. Now I had ammo. And I was ready to use it. When I tell you the first sound of a hammer hitting wood again was pure therapy, I mean it. That thunk echoed like freedom. After months of silence, stress, and bureaucratic nonsense, the construction site finally came back to life. It started one early Saturday morning. I had my coffee, my permit folder, and a brand new crew ready to roll. These guys weren't scared of HOA drama. I'd hired them after explaining everything. The head contractor just laughed and said, "If the paperwork's clean, we're building." Music to my ears. As the saws buzzed and drills whirred, it felt like the whole neighborhood woke up, literally. Curtains twitched, blinds tilted, and phones definitely started recording. You could practically hear the whispers travel from one lawn to another. Wait, is he building again? Yep. I was. And this time, I was bulletproof. The new crew moved fast. Framing went up. Decking boards got nailed in. The backyard started to look less like an abandoned project and more like an actual home again. Every nail that went in felt like payback, not out of spite, but out of pure, beautiful vindication. Of course, it didn't take long for the HOA to notice. On day 2, I got my first official email. Subject line, Notice of Non-Compliance, Immediate Action Required. I smiled reading it. Then forwarded it straight to my lawyer with one line, "We're good, right?" She replied, "You're solid. Keep building." So I did. By day 3, things got spicier. A white SUV slowed down in front of my house, one of those HOA board members who always acted like they were the sheriff of the subdivision. He didn't get out. Just sat there, staring. Then drove off, probably to write a strongly worded email about my defiance. Meanwhile, I turned up the radio for the crew. Work went on. It was funny, the louder the tools got, the more dramatic the HOA became. They sent another letter, this time threatening further action. Then another saying I could be subject to fines. But thanks to my city permit and legal advice, those fines were as empty as their threats. I didn't even reply. Silence, I realized, works both ways. Let them stew this time. Let them send their letters into the void while I built my dream. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now stopped by to chat. A few even admitted they were rooting for me. "It's about time someone stood up to them," one said, watching the crew install the last set of beams. "They've been running this neighborhood like a kingdom." "Not anymore," I told him. The best part? Watching the HOA drive by in slow motion, faces tight, pretending they weren't absolutely fuming. They'd gotten so used to everyone folding under pressure that they didn't know what to do when someone called their bluff and kept building anyway. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee like a man in a movie scene, while the crew hammered away behind me. A board member stopped her walk, glared at the noise, and shouted, "You can't do that without approval." I calmly lifted my coffee cup and said, "Already got it, from the city." The look on her face? Priceless. She huffed off without another word. That day was my personal turning point. Not when I found the loophole, not when I called the lawyer, but that exact moment, right there. Because for the first time in this entire mess, I wasn't reacting to the HOA. They were reacting to me. Their power wasn't gone, but it wasn't absolute anymore. I'd taken control back, one nail at a time. By week 2, the deck was almost done. The sound of saws, drills, and laughter filled the air again. The stress that had haunted me for months started melting away with every piece of wood that went up. And yeah, I'll admit, there was a bit of cinematic irony in all of it. The same neighbors who once stared judgmentally were now dropping off iced tea for the crew. The same HOA president who sent threats was now sneaking by, pretending to check the mail while side-eyeing my brand new structure like it was a personal insult. Funny how quickly power shifts when you stop being afraid of it. The day we screwed in the final board, I stood there looking at the finished result, solid, clean, perfect. The project that was supposed to be my downfall had become my quiet rebellion. The HOA could glare, gossip, and grumble all they wanted. But they couldn't stop me anymore. And as I stood there, sipping that last cup of coffee, watching them drive past in disbelief, I realized something. For the first time, they realized they weren't in charge. When the hammers stopped and the dust finally settled, I thought maybe, just maybe, the HOA would admit defeat and move on. Spoiler, they didn't. If anything, finishing my renovation seemed to ignite something in them. Like I'd personally insulted their authority. And in a way, I guess I had. I hadn't broken their rules, I'd just outsmarted them. Which, apparently, was worse. The retaliation started small. First came a notice of violation in my mailbox. The reason? Trash bins visible from the street. Now, mind you, every single house on my block has trash bins visible from the street. It's physically impossible not to, that's where the trash gets picked up. But sure, I was suddenly the problem. I laughed, rolled my eyes, and wheeled the bins 2 feet to the left. Problem solved. A week later, another letter. This one said, unapproved vehicle parking, potential fine. Translation: my contractor's truck had been parked in front of my house for half a day. On a public street. They were really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. Then came the fines, or at least, attempted fines. $50 here, $75 there. For lawn maintenance, for noise, for construction debris, which was gone by then. They were trying to nickel and dime me into submission. But here's the thing, every single notice had one fatal flaw: they were enforcing things they didn't actually have jurisdiction over. I'd learned their rulebook inside out. I knew exactly what they could and couldn't do. So, instead of getting mad, I just started replying with calm, professional emails attaching the specific clauses from their own documents that proved them wrong. As per Section 4.3b of the Association Guidelines, street parking is permissible for up to 48 hours. The contractor's vehicle was present for 6. Send. No emotion. No extra words. Just pure, surgical precision. It drove them insane. The letters got more desperate. One of them even said, failure to comply may result in legal escalation. That was my favorite. Because I knew exactly what that meant. They had nothing left but empty threats. I didn't bite. Instead, I kept my property spotless. Perfectly trimmed edges, no trash, no noise after hours. I followed every rule to the letter. Because the best way to fight petty power is with flawless compliance. If they wanted to play the rule game, I'd play it better. Then, in one last desperate move, they called the city. I guess they hoped the inspectors would show up, find anything wrong, and shut me down again. But the irony? I welcomed it. I even offered them coffee when they arrived. The inspector took one look around, walked through the project, and said, "Everything looks good here. In fact, this is one of the cleaner sites we've seen. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful." He even gave me a written confirmation of compliance, which I happily scanned and attached to my next HOA email. Subject line: inspection results, full compliance, per city review. I didn't add a single extra word. The attachment spoke for itself. That was the day the retaliation started to lose steam. You could almost feel it, the energy shift. Their letters became fewer, the tone less threatening, almost tired. Like they realized they were shouting into a void, and I wasn't going to flinch. Meanwhile, my renovation looked incredible. The new porch gleamed, the backyard was flawless, and the neighborhood was buzzing, half of them quietly cheering me on, the other half watching the HOA crumble under their own nonsense. The same board members who once strutted through the neighborhood now walked past my house with forced smiles. They didn't dare say anything anymore. Not after the city inspector's visit. Not after my clean paper trail. And me? I was calm. Peaceful, even. I'd learned something powerful through all this: once you stop reacting emotionally, people who thrive on control lose their footing. They feed off chaos, and I wasn't giving them any. So when the next letter came, with its dramatic language about potential further action, I didn't roll my eyes this time. I just placed it neatly in a folder labeled retaliation evidence, and went about my day. Because I knew this wasn't a war anymore. It was a performance. And they were losing the audience. Every threat they threw my way just made them look smaller. Every time they tried to find a flaw, I hit them with proof. Every attempt to make me panic only made me more patient. In the end, they wanted chaos. I gave them compliance. The morning the last board was nailed into place, I felt a weird mix of relief and disbelief. After months of emails, silence, threats, and petty fines, my backyard wasn't just finished, it looked like something out of a magazine. The deck stretched perfectly across the back, warm wood gleaming under the morning sun. The railing was smooth, every post straight and proud. Potted plants lined the edges, adding bursts of green and color, and the new pergola framed the patio like a stage set. My little water feature burbled gently, filling the air with a calm soundtrack. Even the grass around it, carefully preserved and trimmed, looked greener than ever. I walked around, running my hands along the smooth deck boards, taking it all in. Every nail, every beam, every perfectly aligned tile was a small victory. And the best part? Every inch of it was 100% legal, permitted, and documented. The HOA couldn't touch it. By noon, friends and family started arriving. Their excitement was contagious. My sister hugged me so tight she almost knocked me over, laughing, "You actually did it. I thought they'd wear you down." "Nope," I said, grinning. Turns out, stubbornness plus city permits is a winning combo. We ate, drank, and toasted not just to the deck, but to persistence. Every time someone stepped onto the new deck, their eyes widened. Compliments came in waves. "This is amazing. You did all this yourself? Wow, it's perfect. Your backyard looks incredible. I can't believe you went through all that to get here." Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice the HOA president's car slowly creeping past. I waved casually, coffee in hand. Her face, a mix of disbelief and frustration, was priceless. I imagined her internal monologue, "How did he pull this off without breaking any rules?" Neighbors stopped by too. Some who had rolled their eyes at the half-finished chaos months ago now approached with cautious smiles. One elderly man whispered, "I never thought I'd say this, but you really showed them." I just nodded, feeling the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done it right. No shortcuts. No rule breaking. Every step had been precise, strategic, and legally airtight. There's a special kind of pride in winning a battle by playing the game smarter than your opponent. And that's exactly what this was. The HOA had tried to control, intimidate, and silence me. I had done none of the above to them. I simply followed the rules, documented everything, and let the law back me up. I poured myself another cup of coffee and stepped back onto the deck, letting the sun warm my shoulders. My eyes roamed over the backyard, the pergola, the deck, the flower beds, the little water feature, and I realized how much this space represented. It wasn't just wood and nails. It wasn't just landscaping. It wasn't just a patio or a deck or a pergola. It was every late night reading bylaws and city codes. Every phone call to inspectors. Every moment of frustration turned into action. Every petty email or threat they sent, met with calm, precise compliance. This backyard was a testament to perseverance. To patience. To playing the long game and knowing when to act. I took a slow walk around the perimeter, listening to the laughter of friends, the gentle trickle of water, and the faint hum of life that had returned to the property. The neighborhood might have been controlled by an HOA board with a little too much ego, but I had reclaimed my home in the quietest, most satisfying way possible. And in that moment, I understood, this wasn't just about finishing a renovation. It wasn't just about building a deck or a pergola. It was about reclaiming control over my own space, proving that rules, when understood and used correctly, can be a shield as well as a sword. I raised my coffee cup to the sky. The sun glinted off the wood, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. It wasn't just a renovation. It was a statement. After the renovation was finally complete, the air in the neighborhood felt different. Lighter. Less tense. The HOA's grip, once tight and suffocating, had loosened. The whispers that had followed me for months now sounded more like curiosity than judgment. And every once in a while, a neighbor would stop me on the sidewalk and quietly say, "I can't believe you did it. You really stood your ground." The HOA board, predictably, wasn't thrilled. A couple of the more petty members started avoiding eye contact at community events. One or two resigned quietly over the next month, apparently unwilling to continue after their authority had been publicly undermined. The rest, the ones still left in office, were noticeably less bold, meetings were shorter, decisions less dictatorial. The neighborhood had seen that their power wasn't absolute, and some subtle fear of accountability had crept in. Meanwhile, my backyard had become more than just a renovation. It had quietly turned into a symbol, a reminder that homeowners aren't powerless, that even the most controlling HOA can be challenged with patience, knowledge, and careful planning. Friends and family still admired it as a beautiful space, but I knew the real victory was the message it sent. Rules exist for a reason, but so does courage. I started getting small calls and messages from neighbors who were quietly frustrated with other HOA actions. They'd ask for advice, tips, or just someone to confirm, am I crazy, or is this board overstepping again? I shared what I could, always stressing the same mantra: read your covenants. Know your city rights. Document everything. I didn't want anyone else to feel trapped the way I had, stuck in the gray area between fear and compliance. It felt good to help, to pass along the knowledge I had fought so hard to acquire. It was empowering, in a calm, measured way, different from the adrenaline rush of the confrontation months earlier, but equally satisfying. Knowledge, it turns out, really is power. And I had plenty to spare. The project itself became a quiet pride for the community, too. Kids would sometimes play on the deck or under the pergola, neighbors would casually gather for evening coffee, and the space radiated life and purpose. No one talked loudly about the battles that had taken place, but the story was written into the very structure of that backyard: the perfectly aligned boards, the carefully measured pergola, the little water feature that flowed without obstruction. Even the HOA couldn't ignore it. At the next board meeting, discussions were quieter, less combative. They seemed more aware of their limitations, more careful with their tone. Maybe they realized that they weren't the only ones who could read rules, or that trying to bend the rules too far could backfire spectacularly. I had learned a lot over those months: patience, strategy, and the importance of standing firm without losing your cool. It wasn't about being confrontational for the sake of it. It was about taking measured, intelligent action when faced with an unfair obstacle. And it worked. On one particularly quiet evening, I stood on my deck with a cup of coffee, looking at the space that had caused me so much stress but also taught me so much. The sun was low, casting warm light over the wood, and I thought about the journey, the letters, the threats, the silent treatment, the legal research, the meetings, the contractors, and all the small victories in between. I realized that I hadn't just rebuilt a backyard. I had rebuilt something far more important: the balance of power. I had taken a situation designed to control and intimidate me, and I transformed it into a winning, quiet, legal, and undeniable. The HOA might still exist, but their illusion of absolute authority had been shattered, at least in my corner of the world. And that was worth more than any deck, pergola, or water feature could ever be. I raised my cup one last time, a small smile on my face, and thought, I didn't just rebuild my home, I rebuilt the balance of power. Standing on that finished deck, coffee in hand, I couldn't help but look back at everything that had happened. The letters, the silence, the threats, the long nights buried in bylaws and city codes, it all felt like a distant storm now, fading behind the calm of a space that was fully mine. There's a lesson in chaos, I realized. Freedom isn't just about the spaces you occupy, it's about the courage to claim them. Resilience isn't just about surviving obstacles, it's about using them to sharpen your resolve. And power, real power, comes from knowing your rights, your limits, and how to play the game smarter than those trying to control you. HOAs, rules, bylaws, and city codes, all of it can feel overwhelming, controlling, even oppressive. I know that because I lived it. But the truth is, no piece of paper, no board of self-important officials, can take away what you've earned through diligence, knowledge, and persistence. The moment I realized that, everything changed. I think the real turning point is when you stop reacting out of frustration and start acting with purpose. Every time the HOA tried to silence me, I didn't fight fire with fire. I fought fire with facts. Every threat they sent, I answered with clarity. Every delay they imposed, I countered with patience. And every step they hoped would break me only made me stronger. That backyard, that deck, that pergola, that little water feature, it's more than wood and stone. It's a testament to patience, strategy, and quiet defiance. It's the result of countless hours of preparation, research, and precise action. But most importantly, it's proof that obstacles don't have to stop you even when they seem designed to crush your spirit. To anyone out there dealing with control, intimidation, or arbitrary rules, here's what I've learned. Know your rights. Read every line of every covenant. Understand your permits and your local laws. Document everything. Emails, letters, calls, notes, every detail counts. Fight smart, not angry. Anger is loud, but facts are unstoppable. The process isn't always fast. It isn't always easy. And it sure as hell isn't always fun. But in the end, standing your ground isn't about confrontation, it's about strategy, patience, and courage. It's about taking what's rightfully yours and holding it, calmly and firmly, until the other side realizes their power was never absolute. Looking around now, with the sun casting long golden shadows over the wood, I feel a quiet satisfaction. Not the kind that comes from victory over others, but the kind that comes from mastery over circumstance. I didn't just finish a renovation. I reclaimed control. I reclaimed dignity. I reclaimed peace in my own home. And that, I think, is the true reward. For anyone watching, remember this: obstacles are inevitable, rules are meant to guide, but no one, not a board, not a letter, not even an entire HOA, can stop you if you move with knowledge, patience, and confidence. Don't let fear dictate your actions. Don't let control be taken from you. Fight smart, document every move, and keep building, literally and figuratively, toward your vision. And finally, if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it's this. They stopped my renovation halfway, so I finished it my way. That line isn't just about wood, nails, and permits. It's about standing tall in the face of arbitrary control, turning frustration into action, and proving that persistence, strategy, and a little courage will always win. So, when the odds seem stacked, when the rules feel overwhelming, when someone tries to take control of your life, remember this story. Remember that the quiet, calculated fight is often the one that changes everything. And above all, remember that your home, your dreams, and your progress are yours to protect, to grow, and to finish your way.